Yeah, I was wondering if it bothers you that... Yes. Please continue. Well, when you're watching pretentious content on Netflix or Hulu, look, I can't talk about all the things that bother me when it comes to pretentious content on Netflix. We just don't have the time, okay? But, you know, what I like to say, I guess, when I'm talking to people about watching stuff on Netflix, when it gets a little too artsy or pretentious or whatever, I just like to tell them, pretend it's not shitty.
We're from New York, we play horn instruments, baby.
Hey there, you dirty addicts. It's me, Chris Wyden, coming to you live from inside of this tiny device, hoping that one day you will set me free. This little piece of content is going to be all about Pretend It's a City, that new pretentious as all get out show on Netflix. But I'm not going to lie, that is totally the type of show that I would get into, sit down with, tea at night and sink in if it were 5 years ago. But watching it now, which I was definitely attracted to the branding, so I did watch the pilot, I was really kind of concerned with all the ideologies that were so transparently on display, which is anything all the time. Because that's how ideologies work. All of our respective universes are steeped in them. Like the tea I enjoyed while watching this damn show.
Hi, he's got jokes, see?
But anyway, after watching the pilot, I kind of decided I wanted to make this video that's kind of like an ideological analysis of Pretend It's a City. I think I'm gonna do it with other TV shows, movies, and maybe even some news headlines as well, just because I think it's important to be media literate whenever possible, trying to actually look at the messaging of the content we're interacting with, to make sure that we are at the very least staying conscious about what people are trying to communicate and how we are being trained to think. But enough of that, let's get into it. Right off the bat, we're doing a mini-series about a city, and it's the most cliche pick. It's New York City, and we have this narrator who's going to take us into the story of what it's like to be in New York, and maybe they'll say something interesting about their day-to-day life, but instead the first joke we get is like the most stereotypical cliche joke about New York City too.
There are a lot of things on the ground in New York. There are a lot of crosswalks, not that anyone obeys them except me. I'm always yelling at cars. You're in the crosswalk. As if, they can't.
I think the hipstery boomer narration that Fran Lebowitz provides is supposed to be charming and attractive to the hip folks of young and old. But within a few minutes of watching Fran, the first thing I'm thinking of is Lena Dunham's character from Girls.
Manic, pixie, dream girl, pseudo, weedsy bat bullshit.
You see, Fran just kind of sounds like what a millennial hipster will sound like if they ever get the opportunity to, grow old. And I understand that Martin Scorsese is just making a little series with his friend who he thinks is funny. And it's charming. Also, Fran's charismatic. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't charmed by her. It's built into American culture. We love the curmudgeon who gives it to you straight. There's a reason that type of character gives key exposition in a third of all movies.
What's in there?
The answer.
But none of that changes the reality in which this series was made and how dissonant it feels coming out in 2021 when it was clearly made before the pandemic. Fran is the perfect narrator for this series, which is effectively a series about a self-obsessed consumerist metropolis in a self-obsessed country filled with people who are being so effectively persuaded to consume...
Hey, you have to watch Jason Alexander Hoodie.
...that we are constantly distracted from doing anything about our decreasing standard of living.
Do you think it's fair to bring a book into Times Square? It's not fair to the books.
She lives in New York City and has lived there for years, and she looks at the city as her city in which everyone else is kind of going about life badly. And I know this is meant to be funny, but it's meant to be funny because of how easily all of us can relate to that feeling. If you were raised in the US, then you were brought up in a society that was bombarding you with direct and indirect messages every day telling you that you are an individual, that you have a right to be selfish, to pursue happiness, to own property, to gain wealth. We we are taught to separate ourselves from one another and care about ourselves more than our community.
Greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right. Greed works.
This individualism is so transparent and so blatant in Pretentious City that you almost miss it, because the reality is that's how all of us operate in daily life. Fran is a humorist by profession. So effectively everything she says in this movie is supposed to be translated to us as funny, and also the ideologies are supposed to resonate as relatable. Which means that this individualism is something that is being purported, though in an indirect way, and in a way that is not intended to be harmful. But the underlying ideological messaging here is that individuals are good and right and best, and screw everyone else and the collective experience.
In New York, there are millions of people, and the only person looking where she's going is me.
But what's more troubling from a messaging standpoint is the way Fran can tell a story that blatantly ignores the visual reality of our societal decay. The best example of this in the pilot is when Fran tells the most cliche story a person over 60 can tell, how she almost got run over by a bike.
I saw a kid riding a bike down 7th Avenue. He was, with one hand, texting, with the other hand, eating a piece of pizza, and he was driving the bike with his elbows. Oh. He had his elbows on the thing. Oh. And of course, he almost ran me over. Not that he noticed. And that's why I noticed him.
In telling this story, Fran asserts that this anonymous kid on a bike is in her way, which is immediately irritating because it's a public space. Everyone is in everyone else's way in a city. You have a responsibility for your own safety and for yourself when you're in public. Which is a problem, because that's what individualism is trying to get us to think all the time, as opposed to thinking that we all have a responsibility to one another. Oh my God. More importantly, though, is how her critique of this kid totally ignores the context of his life. This kid is eating his lunch, using his phone, and riding his bike all at the same time. I don't care who you are, nobody makes that decision because it delights them. This kid is probably rushing from one work-related thing to another, and this is his only opportunity to eat. But because we're all connected to everybody else now, there's no escaping work, really. So he has to eat at the same time he's communicating some work message while also transporting himself from A to B. Now this is disturbing, but it's not disturbing because Fran is being heartless. It's disturbing because I see a reflection of how I've felt before when dealing with strangers in a public space. This story describes a world that is unsettlingly familiar. It's a world that is mutually stressful and frustrating for everyone involved. But instead of identifying with each other or, attempting to empathize with someone who is clearly working their ass off, probably, instead of that, Fran separates herself from the communal experience. It becomes her experience, the experience of the individual. And that's the sort of outlook that most of us use on a daily basis. It's why you don't always give help every single time you encounter someone who's homeless on the street and needs your help. Because we are trained to put ourselves above the mutual good. We are trained that the individual is primary. We use our individualistic idealism to shield ourselves from seeing the world as it really is. A world full of other people with the same range of emotions. It's a series about a city of 9 million people who don't know each other, narrated by a humorist who needs to be right and wants everyone to know.
I actually never heard of you before.
And the weird, ironic part of this series is that Scorsese might have accidentally made a kind of perfect mirror for society, at least for a 2021 release. As a culture, we are all like Fran, complaining about everything that doesn't matter to distract ourselves from what actually does. Like Fran trudging around New York City, we're just puttering around our homes nowadays, pretending it's not shitty.